Shalom, family. Good to see you all here. Hope you're doing well. I'm sure some of you might have heard about the Admiral Alvin Holsey, who has abruptly decided to leave. Now, they won't give the reason why, but I did hear on the news that him, the Admiral, and Pete Hegseth, who is definitely not qualified for his job, he's definitely a DEI hire, are not seeing things eye to eye. Admiral Alvin Holsey, he was actually overseeing the activities that are going on in Venezuela and the Caribbean Sea, where Donald Trump is trying to blow up boats of who he believe are smuggling drugs. And I don't believe everybody they're targeting is smuggling drugs. I really don't. Now, I know a week ago they blew up a boat, and I heard those men they blew up were fishermen. They were not drug smugglers at all. So the bottom line is, how do you know? How do you know? You know, and I know those folks are really upset because I've, been seeing in the news, and what they're also trying to do is force Maduro to step down, the Venezuelan current president. They want him to step down. It's just like the US to go somewhere and demand a regime change. They do this all the time. And everybody, I don't believe all the drugs that come into the United States are coming from Venezuela. I think they are trying, the big key thing is trying to force a puppet government that the US can control. See, they can't control Maduro at all. So they want to push him out and put in a bunch of puppets that will do anything the United States want. And plus, Venezuela is sitting on a lot of oil. So, this whole thing is just a big mess as far as I'm concerned, what's going on out there in the Caribbean Sea. So I'm going to share my screen and we will get started. But this commander, this admiral, he's been part of the U.S. Navy for 34 years. 34 years. And he's been at the Pentagon for quite some time. And, if you look at his record, he never seemed to have any problem at all until Pete Hegseth got placed over the Department of Defense. I don't see how you can put some low-ranking military guy in charge of the department. Well, the Department of War is what it's called now. You're going to put a low-level military guy in charge of the Department of Defense, and he is a known drunk. Oh, yeah, way to go, Donald Trump. All right, y'all. Thank you for the ones.
Military commander overseeing the Pentagon's escalating attacks on boats off Venezuela's coast, that he is retiring. This is barely a year into his role, his time in that role. And one source tells CNN that tensions had been simmering for weeks between Admiral Alvin Holsey and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and that Hegseth did not believe the admiral was moving aggressively enough to take on and target alleged drug traffickers in the Caribbean. There have been at least 6 U.S. strikes on boats, alleged drug boats in the Caribbean. The latest one disclosed just yesterday. Some of the crew on board that boat are believed to have survived that strike. Also this week, President Trump confirmed that he is now authorizing the CIA to operate covertly inside of Venezuela, linked to all of this. But he did stop short of saying that the intent is regime change. Venezuela's president disagrees.
Hamas. Never before had any previous government, since the CIA has existed, publicly said that it was sending the CIA to kill, to overthrow, and to destroy countries.
Every now and then, someone inside the system blinks first. This week, it was Admiral Alvin Holsey, the man in charge of the U.S. Southern Command. And the timing of his resignation is a little suspicious. See, Holsey's job was simple, right? He oversaw U.S. military operations across Central and South America, including the Caribbean. Drug interdictions, regional stability, counterterrorism. It's not a glamorous post, but it's one of the most sensitive in the Navy. And it's one you don't walk away from mid-mission unless something's wrong. See, and over the last few weeks, right, the U.S. military has been involved in a series of deadly confrontations in the Caribbean. 6 small boats destroyed, 27 people unalived. And the Pentagon says they were drug traffickers. But eyewitness reports and at least one set of survivors tell a different story. See, sources say at least one vessel may have been carrying migrants fleeing Venezuela, not smugglers. And that's where it starts to get ugly. See, Admiral Holsey's resignation was announced quietly. There was no ceremony, no long goodbye. Officially, it's a planned retirement, but unofficially, there's some insiders that are whispering about friction inside the chain of command, particularly over the rules of engagement being used in those Caribbean strikes. Now, multiple reports have hinted that Holsey raised concerns that the mission had expanded beyond its original scope and that the civilian casualties were being brushed aside to maintain this administration's strong border narrative. And if that's true, it isn't just a resignation, it's a crack forming inside the command structure itself. See, Holsey is no lightweight. He's a 30-year Navy veteran. He led carrier strike groups, he commanded the USS Macon Island, and served in Iraq and Afghanistan. He's earned the kind of credibility that you don't dismiss as political. So when someone like that walks away, you don't ignore it. You always have to ask why, because inside institutions like the Pentagon, a well-timed resignation can speak louder than a press conference ever could. Now, over the next few weeks, keep your eye on 3 things here. If there are internal communications or after-action reports that surface about these boat strikes, that's your first sign that Holsey's departure was involuntary. His replacement, if they rush to install a hardliner, it means they're closing ranks. And if they stall, it means something's unraveling. Congressional noise, right? If lawmakers start calling for hearings, that means this story has legs. Admiral Alvin Holsey may turn out to be a footnote in a messy chapter, or the first crack in a dam that's been holding back a flood of uncomfortable truths. Either way, I want you to remember him, because sometimes the people who walk away aren't running from something, they're running back towards the truth. And if that's the case, Holsey might just be the chisel that starts breaking this entire thing wide open.
You guys think the military is actually doing something? Because this breaking news, Admiral Alvin Holsey, who's in charge of the United States Navy's Southern Command and in charge of 10,000 troops in the region, who has only had this position for a year, is stepping down after a remarkable 37-year career. But this position is also in charge of these special operations that have been happening recently, where 5 vessels have been struck off the coast of Venezuela in international waters. And I'm just wondering if one thing has anything to do with the other, or the lecture that he got a month ago from the Secretary of Defense. I'm just wondering if that has anything to do with it, because of course the White House isn't saying anything and the Pentagon isn't saying anything. But Admiral Holsey, who is black, becomes the latest in a line of more than a dozen military leaders, many of them people of color and women, who have left their jobs this year. Most have been fired by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth or pushed out. And then here is a long list of people who have stepped down or been fired. I just don't know why somebody would step down when they're at the peak of their career and have only had the job for less than a year. But I don't know, maybe it's all just a coincidence, right? God bless.
Top military leaders are resigning and retiring as opposed to following illegal orders given by Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth. You saw the screenshot up front of Admiral Alvin Holsey, who is in command of the Southern Unit of the United States Navy. That's the unit that is stationed near Venezuela. And apparently, his resignation is in relation to those boat strikes ordered by Trump and Hegseth that are killing individuals in boats in international waters off the coast of Venezuela. He recently took that command, and normally those last 3 years. So the notion that the military is going to ride in and stop everything and arrest Trump, that's a fallacy. Because that question was asked to a former military leader when Hegseth and Trump had all of the generals and admirals assembled in Quantico, Virginia. And that former military leader said, no, that's not going to happen because that would be a military coup. So it falls back to Congress. Congress needs to get a spine, whether it's the same party or not. And this is a flashing, bright red light going on. And reportedly, Venezuela is amassing their military to prepare for war with the United States, which would be right up Trump's alley, because Trump knows Venezuela can't stand up to the United States military. But the question becomes, if Trump orders United States military to go to war, to invade Venezuela without just cause, what will happen? So Congress, someone needs to challenge Mike Johnson and remove him as Speaker of the House. I don't care if it's Marjorie Taylor Greene or who it is, but we're on the edge of destructive history, and it's unfolding right before our eyes.
What's up, y'all? So, another general has left the military. Head of the U.S. military's Southern Command is stepping down, officials say. Admiral Alvin Holsey is leaving less than a year to his tenure and as the Pentagon escalates attacks against boats in the Caribbean Sea. So I don't know, what's going on. We've been having, drugs coming into this country for many years, since Reagan, when he first started talking about, the war on drugs, and which was, just another way of finding an excuse to lock up Black and Hispanic people, you see. But, this Black general is stepping down. Just, like a couple weeks ago, there was a meeting with 800 generals, and, we had some generals that, don't agree with what this current administration is trying to do, sending military into American cities. It's unheard of. It's unprecedented. But times are changing. I mean, Matthew 24 says there should be wars and rumors of wars, you see. But this general stepped down. They've been showing these attacks on YouTube about, they say these are drug boats. But yeah, I don't believe that. I believe that this administration is trying to get that oil down there in Venezuela. They've always been trying to get that oil. And now they're attacking, people who are maybe politicians or trying to escape, or military personnel that are trying to escape on these boats. And they're just indiscriminately murdering these people as they try to escape. I mean, that I could be wrong, but that's my theory. I never trust these people, what they say on the news. Oh, these are drug boats. Y'all didn't care about these drug boats, all this time that y'all been letting these drugs come into the country and into the Black and Hispanic neighborhoods. Y'all didn't care about these drug boats, entering the country. Why now all of a sudden y'all just indiscriminately blowing up drug boats? That's another thing. Normally they will seize these boats. They will take the drugs and seize these boats, but they just blowing these things up out of the water. They don't even, check to see who's on the boat. Just blow the whole boat up. So it says here, the military commander overseeing the Pentagon's escalating attack against boats in the Caribbean Sea that the Trump administration says are smuggling drugs, said on Thursday that he was stepping down. Why would this general step down only after a year, of being in his position? That's crazy. I mean, here it is. You give your life to the military. You served the military all these years, and now all of a sudden you just step down after these drug boats are being attacked, supposed drug boats. But yeah, I think this general understands that, hey, these people are not carrying drugs. They're just trying to escape out of this country before Trump, invades this country. That's what he's doing. He's trying to invade this country and take over the resources. These people, they're doing the same stuff, man. They're doing the same stuff that they're doing over in Gaza, taking over people's land and everything. They're going to do it again here in Venezuela. And that's why this general is stepping down. So it says the officer, Admiral Alvin Holsey, is leaving his job as head of the U.S. Southern Command, which oversees the operations in Central and South America, even as the Pentagon has rapidly built up 10,000 forces in the region. Why this massive buildup all of a sudden? Think about it. Built up some 10,000 forces in the region in what it says is a major counter-drug and counter-terrorism mission. That sounds very familiar, like the war on weapons of mass destruction. That's what it sounds like to me. But there's no drugs. They just want that oil down there. That's what this is all about. And they're killing people over it. Blowing up innocent people. What happened to the rules of engagement? If you're fired upon, then you destroy. Seek and destroy. If you're fired upon, what happened to that? What happened to the rules of engagement in Gaza? Dropping bombs on women and children and unarmed men in a hospital. That's against the Geneva Conventions. You can't blow up a hospital. You can't blow up a church, a mosque, a school. What happened to those rules of engagement? But yeah, 10,000 forces in the region in what it says is a major counter-drug and counter-terrorism mission. It was unclear why Admiral Holsey is suddenly departing less than a year into what is typically a 3-year job in the midst of the biggest operation in 37-year career. So this guy is stepping down, after serving 37 years, just all of a sudden up and leave because he doesn't want to engage. He doesn't want to follow the orders that were given to him during that meeting when the 800 generals, had that meeting. So things are getting crazy out here, y'all. It's getting crazy out here. You having generals step down, generals are being fired. Military are being used against U.S. citizens. They're invading countries. Taking over resources and blowing up innocent, unarmed people. They just blowing up these boats. You see? What's going on? Blowing up schools and churches and hospitals. I saw a video where these rescuers went into a building that was blown up, a hospital that was blown up. And then when the rescuers came to try to find survivors, they sent another missile and blew them up. That totally goes against Geneva Conventions. That is war crimes. That is considered a war crime. You see? So, hey man, just watch and pray. Things are very strange in this world now. Very strange, very weird, and it can be fearful if you don't understand the scriptures and understand that all these things must come to pass. Shalom.
The admiral's revolt against the Trump regime has begun. Utter turmoil and chaos taking place in the United States military right now as yet another top commander has suddenly resigned. This time, the top commander in Latin America, Alvin Holsey, suddenly quit less than 1 year into his tenure as the head of Southern Command, the individual in charge of the United States Navy in Latin America. Apparently, this resignation comes based on his strong opposition to the Trump regime's war crimes taking place off the coast in Venezuela and Colombia, where the Trump regime continued to demand unlawful orders be carried out in the form of blowing up these fishing boats off the coast of Venezuela and Colombia as well. Here's the reporting. 4-star Admiral Alvin Holsey, head of Southern Command, stepping down after less than a year in his position. One of the U.S. officials said that Admiral Holsey had raised concerns about the mission and the attacks on alleged drug boats. The reporting from CNN, New York Times, Washington Post, and others is as follows. Tensions were simmering between Secretary of Defense, who unlawfully refers to himself as Secretary of War, former Fox News host Pete Hegseth, and Holsey for weeks. Hegseth did not believe that Holsey was moving quickly and aggressively enough to combat drug traffickers in the Caribbean and complained about not being given info he needed about ops per sources. But SOUTHCOM, which is what Alvin Holsey, Admiral Holsey led, was concerned about the operations not being lawful. In other words, that war crimes were being committed, and Admiral Holsey did not want to be a part of these war crimes. I can't emphasize enough how unusual a resignation like this is, and I think it demonstrates what I think will soon take place with mass resignations amongst the top admirals and generals. As Phil says, U.S. Admiralty was born after the Civil War. A 4-star admiral quitting mid-operation, the way Holsey just did, is a rupture of that order. Holsey's exit amid lethal Caribbean strikes is a 5-alarm warning. Trump and Hegseth are pushing unlawful orders and driving commanders out. The admiral's revolt has begun. The admiral's revolt against the Trump regime has begun.
Stuff like this. This man was in this position for less than a year, and he's quitting. He said he's done. He is done with them.
I just want to say this, y'all. This man is stepping down because he had a conscience. And he knew what they were doing was wrong. And he knew their demands, Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth, their demands are wrong. And I think at the end of the day, y'all, what they're really upset about is if this is war crimes, they wanted a black face on it. They wanted a black face on it to take responsibility if this whole thing implodes. And I think that's what this admiral was being used for. And I think he realized it. That's why he stepped aside. He didn't want his face on these war crimes that they're committing. He didn't want that. So, good for him for doing the right thing. Yeah, he's been in the military 37 years, but it doesn't mean he got to sit around and do dirt for Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump. But I think that's what they're really upset. They wanted this black face to be on these war crimes, and he wasn't having it. This admiral, he was not having it. So let's resume.
He cannot do his job under this administration. An admiral. Admiral Holsey, go on about your business. You don't need this. You don't need this. This is what this country is coming to. I read somebody say, I I was reading something, and someone said it's a shame that these people are just leaving the government, they're leaving the military, and leaving us high and dry. Why the fuck should they stay around for this? The people that you should be talking to are the ones you put into power. It doesn't start with the military people. It starts with your representatives, your senators, the ones you put in power. Those are the ones that are agreeing to go with this shit.
The Secretary of Defense is announcing a top military commander who is in charge of the U.S. Southern Command is retiring now unexpectedly. Remember, this is the region, of course, where those escalating attacks against boats in the Caribbean, those boats off the coast of Venezuela that the Trump administration has said have narco-terrorists on board. We're just getting in a statement here from the Admiral, writing in part, "It's been an honor to serve our nation, the American people, and to support and defend the Constitution for more than 37 years. Secretary Hegseth says Admiral Alvin Holsey will retire at the end of this year. It's not clear why it's happening now, but it's coming, of course, as the president is stepping up that military campaign in the Caribbean, not just on the boat strikes you're seeing here, but as we reported right here last night with those authorization of the CIA operation inside Venezuela.
Military leaders have been expressing their concern over the increase in U.S. presence in the Caribbean and around Venezuela, to the point where the military commander who has been overseeing the attacks on ships in the Caribbean has stepped down. The U.S. leader of their Southern Command, which oversees all military operations in Central and South America, even as the U.S. military has increased their presence to some 10,000 people, he's stepping down from his post early. Even after a 37-year career, he has expressed concerns over the mission that he's been tasked with overseeing. And according to sources, that's the reason he's stepping down. And this is pretty unprecedented. According to Representative Adam Smith, prior to Trump, he can never think of a commander leaving his post early. But my problem is, if this is one of the better commanders in terms of integrity and actually following the Constitution and not wanting to follow unconstitutional orders, him retiring early just means they're going to put someone in that does not care about that.
Here's something for you. A 37-year naval veteran, 4-star Admiral Alvin Holsey, has just resigned. Admiral Holsey was the one overseeing the entirety of the Southern Command. You know, the one that's bombing fishing boats and shit like that off of Venezuela. He resigned 1 year into what is typically a 3-year command. Wonder why? Is it because I was just following orders is not a sufficient defense for war crimes?
Now to the escalating tensions between the United States and Venezuela, whose dictator is under U.S. indictment.
We learned today that the U.S. has put on a display of military muscle at Nicolas Maduro's doorstep. Here's Charlie D'Agata.
In a dramatic new show of force, 3 B-52 long-range bombers flew for hours yesterday off the coast of Venezuela. Late today, the commander in charge of the mission, Admiral Alvin Holsey, abruptly stepped down, a surprise move less than a year into the job. That's after President Trump told reporters he authorized CIA operations in the country, prompting concern from Democrats on Capitol Hill.
Starting wars that may spiral out of control ought to be deeply alarming to the American public.
There are now 10,000 troops in the Caribbean, including 8 warships and a submarine. And new images show military helicopters, which could carry special operations soldiers 90 miles off Venezuela's coast.
We are certainly looking at land now because we've got the sea very well under control.
The U.S. military took out another alleged drug-carrying boat this week, the 5th strike in 6 weeks. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has fired back against the escalation, saying there will be no regime change or CIA-orchestrated coup. President Trump has not explicitly called for regime change, but the administration has made clear it does not want Maduro to remain in power. There's a $50 million reward for information leading to his arrest for alleged drug trafficking. Former U.S. Ambassador to Panama, John Feely, said Maduro has long been a problem for the U.S.
He is the nominal head of a government that has been wholly captured by organized crime in Venezuela.
On the mission commander's sudden resignation, Defense Secretary Hegseth released a statement thanking Admiral Holsey for his 37 years of service, but provided no reason for his departure. Sources tell CBS News there was tension between the two men.
All right, y'all. So it's been circulating on the news that another top military commander has left their post. A top commander in the Navy for Latin America, Alvin Holsey, resigned and was like, I'm not getting jiggy with what this president is doing. Because of the escalating tensions and the various attacks going on over in Venezuela and in the Caribbean Sea, he was like, no, I'm not dealing with this, and I don't want to be a. And while I certainly can understand a person feeling like, listen, I don't want no parts, I don't want to deal with this administration, they got too much going on. Don't we need people like him and like others who are willing to stand up to this president and this regime in these trying times? Because if the good people resign, then won't he just install his loyalists who will do what he wants without question? And then what buffer do we have? That's my only concern. My concern is if the people and the institutions that are in place in the various parts of the government are all bending the knee to him, then what? Then what? Mind you, meanwhile, back at the ranch, there are 2 survivors of the latest strike off the Caribbean, and they have now been taken by the U.S. Navy. So we're just going to let that hang in the ether. Y'all, listen. Nothing but the blood of Jesus. What can wash away my sins? Nothing but the blood of Jesus. What can make me whole again? Nothing but the blood of Jesus.
Yeah. And like I said to y'all in the beginning, what proof do they have that these boats had drugs on there? This goes back to when Elon was in there and he kept saying they were finding all this fraud, and we kept saying, and I said it from the very beginning before other people were even saying it. Well, where's the proof of the fraud? And how come we haven't seen this fraud? How come we haven't seen not one shred of evidence that there was fraud and spending and all this illegal stuff going on? And to this very day, Elon left back in May. And before he left, he was claiming, oh, we are going to show the proof. They never did. They never did. So you mean to tell me they got all this proof about what's on those boats? And just knowing that, I want y'all to think about something else. Just knowing that, why would anybody take boats out in the sea? They know the U.S. Navy is there. They know they're there. So why would they put boats in the ocean and they're drug boats and the Navy is right there and that country knows the Navy is right there? And as far as Maduro is concerned, America is always trying to force a regime change. They're always trying to do it. So at the end of the day, that's all. They want full control over that land. They want the resources from that land. And see, I'm glad this Admiral Holsey has stepped down. Now they can't use him and his name when this stuff come in question. They can't put it all on him. So I'm glad he stepped aside because he saw something wasn't right about this whole operation. Donald Trump is Mr. Bone Spurs. He doesn't have any military experience. And I think the highest Pete Hegseth was a major. Okay, that's nowhere near what an admiral is. So you got people that are not qualified trying to carry out these operations, talking about all these boats they're blowing up are drugs, which I'm just sorry, y'all. I'm just not believing. I'm not believing it. All we're going to hear is, oh, they, remember Elon caught all this spending and all this money. Well, what happened to all the money that Elon alleged saved on this government by firing people and stuff? Where's all this money? I'm sorry, if I can't believe you on that, I cannot believe you on this. I believe this country got an agenda, and their agenda, because listen to how Donald Trump was talking when he first came in office. What'd he say? Oh, we can make Canada the 51st state. Oh, yeah, we need to take over Greenland. See, that's all this man got on his mind. And remember Gaza? Oh, yeah, we'll just clear off the land. And, that's prime real estate. That's all this man got on his mind, is stealing somebody's land. And you think he don't want to do that with Venezuela? Of course he does. Yeah, he want to take over that land. And just this past weekend, I heard Donald Trump wants plans to, they've been in the sea just blowing up boats. He wants to now take it on the land. He wants to go in there on the land and do attacks on the land in Venezuela. I think that's a big mistake. And I think this admiral probably told them that was a big mistake. You're attacking people that did nothing to you. And drugs, okay, so don't most of the fentanyl that come in this country come from China? All right, how many naval boats did you put outside of China and start blowing up boats there? I just think Donald Trump is very disingenuous. They said drugs are smuggled in from Canada too. Are you putting boats up the coast of Canada and Mexico? So I'm just having a hard time believing this. Do I think drugs come in from Venezuela? Of course I do. But Venezuela is far from the only nation that is bringing drugs into the U.S. That's my only point. But if they go on land like Donald Trump wants, this is a war. This is a full-scale war at that point. And I just pray none of your family members got to be in there. I just pray he does not take this to the level where many people that you know personally will have to go. That's part of the military. Yeah, it's easy for Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth to do this. They're not the ones that are out there fighting this. But good for that brother. Don't let them put crimes on you, because that's exactly what they will do. They'll keep you there and then claim you were the mastermind behind the whole thing just to keep their hands clean. So good for this admiral. So y'all, I'm going to go ahead and conclude. Thank you so much for being here. I deeply appreciate it. My final live stream will be at 8:45, and this one is on Candace Owens and losing to the high court in Australia for her to get a visa to go there. So hopefully I will see you all then. And I need to thank some people. Lisa Jackson, thank you so much for your super chat. The general did the right thing by leaving. I agree. I definitely agree with you on that. And thank you for your support for my channel. And the Crawford experience. This brother was tired of these folks' shenanigans. Yes, he was. If nothing else, I have to commend him for looking out for himself. and not worry about Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth and whatever garbage they got going on. So once again, thank you so much for your support for my channel. Okay, everybody, enjoy your night and shalom, family.